guys, and welcome to Ancestral Recall. I'm your host, Eli Kaplan, and I profile sets of Magic's past. I tell you about the noteworthy cards, the cool designs, the mechanics, and what's best about the set. Last time we looked at the setting, the mechanics, and the artifacts, and today we're finishing up our look at Mirrodin, the 2003 expert level expansion, by looking at the 5 colors and giving you the final verdict. So sit back, grab a drink, and enjoy. By the way, today I'm going through the set in Wooburg order, as is the norm. The only times I don't are when the set's numbering follows alphabetical instead of Wooburg, or when something stands out so prominently, such as in the case of the artifacts. And yeah, after Mirrodin, the next set I'm going to talk about is a really early set. White's theme in Mirrodin focuses on its creatures. The Leonin and Loxodons are the most trained warriors of the plane, and so that means that its representatives are the best at carrying equipment. Skyhunter Cub gets its wings when it picks up a bone splitter, or more flavorfully, a Leonin Scimitar. The rare Loxodon Punisher gets +2/+2 for each piece of gear it carries. The Leonin Denguard gets to strike and defend with a bonus when equipped, and Auriok Steel Shaper gives his fellow soldiers and knights a pump with gear. Auriok Blade Warden's pump effect, connecting his power to someone else, reminds me very heavily of Legion's Timberwatch Elf, one of the most brutally format warping limited commons of all time. It takes some investment to get the Blade Warden to make some big pumps, but it's well worth it. That guy was a total first pick in draft. Not every white creature in the set was about equipment. Leonin Skyhunter's 2/2 flying stats for 2 mana were matched only by one precedent, Apocalypse's Gaia's Skyfolk. This was a major proposition in value terms. And yet, in an era defined by affinity, the Skyhunter just wasn't enough. Mirrodin's in Modern, and Urza's Saga isn't. Now, Saga's Arcane Laboratory was the first effect to lock down the pace of spells, limiting each player to just 1 per turn. But Wizards wisely decided to juggle this ability to the color of law and rulemaking. Rule of Law is an important safety valve for formats that can have totally broken spell combinations. If you're playing Commander with people who spell spams in a turn, like say Narset, Rule of Law is a great way to restore sanity. There are other creatures that have similar effects, such as Aethersworn Canonist and Eidolon of Rhetoric, but they're easier to kill. I don't love playing counterspells in limited formats, but in this set, Blue got Annul, one of the best conditional counters of all time. This reprint from Urza's Saga really shone in limited, when it could counter over half the spells in the format, and most players started their games with an untapped island over other lands, if at all possible, just to represent the threat of this counterspell. I'm very hesitant to bring up one of the most surprisingly brutal cards in multiplayer formats, but it's here in Mirrodin, so I've got to mention it. Fate Spinner forces players to forfeit either their draw step, their combat phase, or their main phase. Thankfully, this effect is on a creature, so it's not too hard to get rid of it, but Fate Spinner slows down the pace of the game dramatically, and it's a good way to make enemies. This is an undercosted yet incredibly powerful symmetrical effect. Getting a tutor for 3 mana that puts the card into your hand is a reasonable deal, and that's exactly what Fabricate does. It's a great fixed version of Urza's Legacy's Tinker, because Fabricate still demands that you pay mana for the artifact that you're getting instead of, hey, life. Nurok Spy is Blue's best limited common, essentially a Phantom Warrior that was so much easier to cast. These guys didn't get past much. Quicksilver Elemental. This isn't quite clone, but it does allow you to copy activated abilities on creatures, and you can even pay for those abilities with blue mana if you want. Now, the most lethal thing this did in Limited involved Spike Shot Goblin. Yeah, now, Onslaught brought copy effects back to Magic after a several-year hiatus, but Mirrodin signaled that they were back in force. And this guy was a powerhouse in Limited, too. Regress looks like a bad deal because it's a boomerang for 3 mana, but consider this. If you hit a creature with 3 pieces of equipment on it, it forces opponents to pay 5 or 6 or 7 mana just to get back to parity. This is a set's limited card that is deceivingly underpriced. If you enjoy dirtling, Shared Fate decks are for you. Just play Shared Fate, stuff to keep yourself from dying in the early game, and no win conditions. The basic assumption is that you're going to be able to get win conditions and the appropriate mana off of your opponents. Now, I've played against this a few too many times to enjoy it, but man, this card is some ridiculousness. Nothing else in Magic is like this. I swear, it should have been an unhinged card or an unglued card or something, but no, we got it in Black Border Magic. Barter in Blood. This was a staple in black-blue control decks. This card advantage spell brutalized mid-range decks or stunted ramp decks developments by killing 2 mana producers, effectively killing 2 mana with 1 4-mana spell. And since then, Barter in Blood has seen print and Avacyn restored. But the larger number of creatures in Standard and Unlimited kept it from being as dominated as it was when it first saw print. This card also excels in EDH, paradoxically both in token decks, where the sacrifices are negligible, and in creature-light decks. Barter in Blood was a really big deal back in 2003. Betrayal of Flesh. I love this guy in EDH. The entwine cost is steep, but late game, it's not that big a deal to lose 3 lands, and the potential for instant speed removal and reanimation that lets you get stuff from anywhere is just too delicious to pass up. Ooh. This is in all my black EDH decks, and it's so much fun. I just love this spell every time I draw it. And also note that this spell has no restrictions on what creatures it kills. Compare that with Terror. Chimney Imp was immediately pegged by most players as the worst card in the set. Now, many sets have a card that gets mocked, from Great Heart, to Hundrug, to Charging Badger. Chimney Imp did have a reasonable come-into-play trigger, but its excessive cost made it a target for humiliation. Disciple of the Vault. This guy was an absolute terror when Arcbound Ravager saw print, turning Affinity's combo into consistent turn 4 kills with Overkill. This card totally deserved the ban. And yeah, I played this card in my initial Megatog deck. Promise of Power. What is it that you want? Lore at the cost of years? Or putting out a demon token? Now that triple black and that casting cost, that was quite demanding. And if you had 9 mana, well, that's an exciting prospect. I love flavorful cards like this. Reaver Demon. Destroy all non-black, all non-artifact creatures if hardcast? Well, that's a way to avoid cheating, I guess. Reaver Demon failed to make waves when it first saw print, but when the first Commander precons came out and people started playing the precons against each other, Reaver Demon rocked tables to the core. Oh, fun fact, like most of you out there who care about odd words, the 5 of us, I wondered why this card was so horribly spelled. In fact, this guy isn't even carrying a scythe. Okay, Reaver. Well, actually it turns out that in the 17th century, Scottish cattle raiders would prey upon hapless villages and take away their livestock. And the word for this was reivers. R-E-I-V-E-R-S. I guess that this guy is the most badass cattle mutilator ever. Let's take a look at a key reprint, Terror. When you drafted core sets, which admittedly were usually crap to draft, or any other limited formats where you had Terror, well, Terror was a staple. But in this set, it's at its absolute other worst. It killed less than half of the creatures in the format. Shatter and other artifact destruction spells were far superior in this block's limited. You would see Terrors at 11th, 12th, 13th pick in a pack. That's preposterous in any other format. But here, it's crap on a stick. Also, that art is seriously ugly. Was Wizards trying to make us realize it was a bad pick by making the card's art so unappealing? You might want to call that a conspiracy. Wrench Mind harkens back to Hymn to Torak, forcing opponents to discard 2 cards for just 2 mana, not the usual bog standard 3. However, the opponent could circumvent the discard, making it a lot less painful by just pitching an artifact instead. This was a disappointing spell in Standard, but was incredibly good in cubes and other assorted formats. I strongly recommend it. Red starts off strong with Arcslogger, a mainstay of big red decks. This 4/5 fatty could get out 3 jolts in most games without having to suffer. But yeah, this puts your late game potential in dire peril. Few cards have explored a range of design space like this, and the stats on this guy, they're pretty reasonable by 2003 standards. Confusion in the Ranks is a delightful multiplayer chaos card, allowing players to continuously fight over who has the best toy. Hi, Nick Fong! Keep in mind that this trigger is not optional. I love stuff like this in multiplayer games because it punishes those jerks who play with Avacyn. Detonate. This deep cut of a reprint was a sideboard force to be reckoned with. Destroying an artifact and tacking on damage is awesome. Now, it isn't as mana efficient as Shadowmoor's Smash to Smithereens, but it's still awesome. I've used Grab the Reins in Limited to deal 21 damage on turn 5. Ouch indeed. With Megatog. Now with combat damage on the stack, he was going to take 21, but before that happened, before he could off-strike to gain life, yeah, oops, I grabbed the reins for 21. Ooh. Now, this card does get some play in Commander due to its versatility. Stealing and then flinging a guy at an opponent is pretty awesome, especially if you can one-shot an opponent with their own commander. Krark Clan Shaman is one of my favorite limited red 1-drops. It was quite good, clearing the board of insect tokens, mana mirror, and general nuisances. Once upon a time at GP Shizuoka, which was my first limited money finish, I slapped a Sword of Kaldra onto the Shaman. And then a Nurok Hoversail. So I had a flying 6/6 battleship that could exile all non-flyers by sacrificing another artifact. That's what I call a Voltron. This is also the tournament where I did that grab the reins on the Megatog with damage on the stack on turn 5. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that was my best Grand Prix sealed pool I ever opened. Molten Rain was a major component of one of the last major land destruction decks to run wild in Standard. Molten Rain functioned perfectly fine as a Stone Rain, but did extra damage if an opponent had the temerity to run non-basics. In the Standard format, where Tooth and Nail's Urzatron and Affinity's artifact lands were everywhere, this was a consistent damage dealer as well as a tempo play. Shrapnel Blast was a spell in red decks with artifacts that caused great fear in opponents. Trading 2 mana and an artifact, especially an artifact that's going to be dead in a second, for a quarter of a player's life is intimidating. And this particular combination has been powerful in every limited format it's been legal in, as well as constructed formats. But never has it been as good and constructed as at the time of its release. Slith Firewalker was the most powerful of the Sliths, due to its haste, which allowed it to load up on the counter race almost immediately. Now, this isn't quite as powerful as Innistrad's Stromkirk Noble, which could hit the table on turn 1, freeing up mana on turn 2 instead. But the Firewalker was plenty good enough for red mages to jam it out there on turn 1 with the assistance of Chrome Mox. After the debacle of Onslaught Limited with Sparksmith, Wizards decided to play it safe with Spikeshot Goblin and tack on a mana cost to activate it. Now, while this guy didn't dominate boards the same way Sparksmith did, it was pretty close, and with some equipment backing it up, the Goblin was brutal. This was a regular first pick in draft. Forget Mark Rosewater's claims of board complexity. This guy's and Sparksmith's limited dominance are why Wizards doesn't print repeatable direct damage at common anymore. Deconstruct and Creeping Mold were incredibly powerful spells in Limited, taking out major threats. Deconstruct explored space that hadn't been trod since Urza's Saga, giving players 3 green mana back when the spell resolved. Giving a flat 3 mana instead of untapping lands also limited its potential for abuse. Lessons were learned. Unfortunately for Deconstruct, its free nature still required players to have 3 mana, and so constructed decks immediately switched over to Darksteel's cheaper Oxidize as soon as that set hit the street. Another superstar in Limited that also saw significant constructed play was Viridian Shaman. Grey Ogre stats plus a Shatter on top is always an amazing deal. And when the artifacts are everywhere, well, yeah, you gotta play with it. When Wizards returned to Mirrodin in the Phyrexian Uprising, this particular elf got corrupted. If you didn't want to play artifacts and had access to green, you probably wanted to ramp up to Molder Slug. This Titanic 4/6 for 5 mana forced all players to sacrifice an artifact on their upkeep. This was also a beast, allowing Onslaught's Beastmasters to add a new tool to their array of fatties like Ravenous, Baloth, and Darkslogger. Now, Molder Slug stats are a little anemic by today's 5-drop standards, but that sacrificing ability will serve EDH players in good stead. Do you like token creatures? 1 Dozen Eyes, which has one of the most abstract yet intriguing card names in Magic's history, let you spit out the 5/5 token or 5/1/1s, and with Entwine, you get 6 creatures and 10 power. A Dozen Eyes. Now, this never made the grade in Constructed, sadly, but lots of casual cubes may like the variety that this card offers. Sylvan Scrying was a key combo component, allowing players to assemble efficient lands like Cloudpost or the Urza's lands that were currently legal in Standard thanks to 8th edition. And if you wanted to find a way to use all that mana you got from Sylvan Scrying, the best way to do it was with Tooth and Nail. Tooth and Nail was my jam in Mirrodin Standard, allowing players to fetch out any number of powerful combos such as Triskelion and 5th Dawn's Mephidros Vampire, which gave you the power to destroy all of your opponent's creatures, or I could get Darksteel's Darksteel Colossus, an 11/11 indestructible trampler, and Eternal Witness, which allowed me to put Tooth and Nail back in my hands, allowing me to recast it the next turn. Ooh, so exciting! Now, my particular approach to Tooth and Nail had Rampant Growth and Talisman of whatever the white-green one was. I forget the name, which allowed me to cast Chroma's Vengeance on turn 4, which was my major solution to affinity decks. Blow up all the artifacts, which means your artifact lands, and their creatures and enchantments. Wrath of God and Armageddon for 6 mana? Yeah, that worked really well. I even ran Pulse of the Field to keep my life high enough. It was quite janky against most other Tooth and Nail decks, but my build-up managed to get a 70% matchup against Affinity. But Affinity in Standard could always win 30% of its games, regardless of matchup, because it was so efficient. Tooth and Nail, a 9-mana archetype in Standard, and for many years after that, a backbreaker in EDH. If you play that format, you know what it does very well. This spell puts the fear into players, and rightly so. Troll Ascetic is the poster child for hexproof. It isn't the first creature to have hexproof, which was Autumn Willow, but Autumn Willow needed mana to switch Shroud over. Troll Ascetic was the first real hexproof creature to see tournament play, and the real draw of this guy was that he could carry equipment without the fear of being hit by spot removal. I would be negligent if I didn't mention Cloudpost, a land that has made a considerable impact on both Standard and Modern. Not that much in Extended, but definitely in Modern ramp decks. Scars of Mirrodin finally printed a new Locus with Glimmerpost, and Time Spiral added Veziva, which allowed more copies of Cloudpost to hit the table. And that's the 5 colors. Before we give this set a final score, let's take a short break to look at the top 5 most valuable cards. Final verdict. Well, Mirrodin did several things very successfully. It introduced several exciting mechanics, including one that has stuck around for good: equipment. Mirrodin has so many cool pieces of equipment, but hey, Wizards pushed it hard. Equipment made creatures matter in Magic in a brand new way, pushing them merely beyond guys with activated abilities or bundles of powers and toughness, into bearers that could pick up a key resource and exploit it. Equipment was a flavor home run, and that is a huge feather in Mirrodin's shiny cap. I'm not going to say that Imprint is a one-hit wonder, even if there ever was really one card that made it big in the tournament scene, that being Isochron Scepter. And okay, a few control decks ran duplicates, but Imprint is a mechanic that Wizards felt gun-shy about, since it never saw print on a common. This mechanic definitely has power and is fondly remembered, but Wizards recognized that they didn't want to push Imprint too hard in the original Mirrodin. It's hard to complain about Entwine. Now, Entwine costs a ton, which means that in limited play, it usually didn't come to fruition, but one side of the card was almost always enough. And let's be fair, Entwine was a refinement of the split card mechanic, and we even had the fuse element from Dragon's Maze. Now, Entwine spells only have one piece of art on it, but I am a huge fan of this mechanic. Let's get to this. Here's the problem. Mirrodin was the best-selling set of Magic for a few years later. Well, okay, Darksteel after it. But Mirrodin sold very well, and few sets after, for a while, matched. Why? Because after Mirrodin, the player base shrunk. One of the most infamous combo decks of all time, perhaps the most famous standard combo deck, took over the format, and Wizards took far too long to use bannings to gut it and return the metagame to its diverse normal. I'm talking about the Affinity deck. Affinity ran players out of the game. I personally stayed within the fold the whole time, playing standard almost every weekend with a green-white, tooth and nail ramp deck specifically designed to gain life, destroy artifacts, and get 6 mana as soon as possible, so I could play Chroma's Vengeance. And from there, all I needed was a fatty to take down their decimated board. But that was it, and it happened over and over. Now let's be fair. Affinity did not get out of hand until Darksteel's release, because that set gave us Arcbound Ravager and Skullclamp. Before that, things were pretty good. Affinity was a limited tool, but only a standard novelty. And today, Affinity is still a viable archetype in Modern and Legacy, and it's reasonably fair, and I suppose that those cards go away to make the set look better by comparison. But Mirrodin laid the seeds for a significant decline in the game being played, with Frogmite, Disciple of the Vault, Mirror Enforcer, and the Artifact lands, and those cards are a serious mark against it. Even if you're filled with amazing, cool, fun toys, if you never get to play with them because Affinity kills you, it's pointless. If you love artifacts, Mirrodin is a solid set. If you want to see engaging creatures and board development refined to a science with mana managing equipment deployment and tactical geniuses winning, then Mirrodin will be one of your favorite sets to explore. Its limited game is awesome, and there's so many cool artifacts to play. Don't get me wrong. I love so many of the cards in this set. It was a very challenging limited format because in any given seal pool, once you honed in on your colors, well over half the cards in your deck were still playable. There's so many good things I can say about this set, but I have to acknowledge the holistic effect the set had on the game and the players, and it was a horrendous one. Fittingly, I give Mirrodin a 7 out of 10 good. It's well above average, but if a set's bad for the game, it needs to be called out for its sins. And if Mirrodin's artifact lands weren't in the set, it'd probably get a 9 out of 10. But as is, 7. Do you guys agree with my rating? Disagree? Is there something I forgot? Make your voice known in the comments. And if you enjoyed this show, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell your friends about it. Next time, Darksteel. Thanks for watching. This is Eli Kaplan for Ancestral Recall, signing off. Good games and good luck.